You're like, you're actually a little worse, I guess. Okay. And the thing is, like, something that's going to be, it's hard to actually do something.
Really?
Nothing saying it's just an hour. It's still built like that's what.
Right, good morning. Nice to see you all. How's everyone? Hanging in there? Tired? Yeah, right. My weekends are exhausting. I'm like, I need a weekend to recover from my weekends. I don't know. It's like the whole thing is sports. It starts on Saturday and it's like all day Saturday soccer and then all day Sunday softball. It's a long weekend, right? Monday hits and I'm like, I'm ready for another one, right? But that's all right. It's coming to me. It feels like fall today. I feel like I'm saying that, but it feels so nice. Like it's cool. I love it. I love when it's cold and not like 100 degrees. I'm not built for heat, right? It's just not my thing. But, a couple of things really quick before I forget. I graded all of your first part of your papers, right? So a lot of fun like show and movie choices, kind of all over the place. So that's fun. I did grade them. The vast majority of you got 10 out of 10 points on it. If you missed points, it was probably because you either didn't give me the citation information or it was really, really brief. Like a couple of people just gave me like a sentence or so, but most of you got 10 out of 10. If you didn't turn in that first part of the paper, you can still email it to me for like half points. 5 points are better than no points. So if you didn't turn it in, you can still send that to me. That's totally fine. I also want to remind you or mention, I guess we haven't talked about it yet, our first exam is a week from today. Okay, so it's coming up. Hopefully that's not a surprise to anybody, but I want to take a few minutes and talk about it just to make sure that you know what to expect, you know how to prepare. A couple of you have an exam in my other class on Wednesday this week, but this one, our exam's on Monday. So I just want to take a couple minutes to just kind of go over that a little bit. So let's go to Canvas together for a moment. So on Monday, we won't, I got tired of waiting for me. We won't have class in person. So our exams will be on Canvas, which I think is really nice for all of you, because what that means is you can take it at home or like in the comfort of wherever you would like to take it. You can use your notes, you can use your book. There's really no reason that you shouldn't all do phenomenally. I haven't made these exams any harder because they're online. So I expect a lot of A's and that will just make me happy and hopefully make you happy and reduce our anxiety. So hopefully that makes you feel a little better. Yeah. What was that?
What? Monday? Oh.
Monday.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I have awful hearing, right? Monday, yeah. So on Monday, we won't meet in person and the exam will open up at basically 12:01 a.m. on Monday morning. And my goal by not meeting is that you could take it from 10 to 11:15, right? It's 75 minutes, so it's the exact same time as we have class. So you could take it right now, but if you would rather take it later in the day or earlier in the day, you can take it anytime between 12:01 a.m. and when it closes at 11:59 p.m. Okay, but when it closes at 11:59 p.m., it is gone and too late. So please make sure you take it at some point on Monday. Okay, so the exam will be due that day by 11:59 p.m. We won't meet in person. I'll send you a reminder Sunday night, just in case you forget, but it will open up that morning and then you'll take it at some point during the day. And on Canvas is where you'll take it, right here where it says quizzes on the left. Sorry, it still cuts that off a little bit. You'll click on quizzes and it's right here, exam number 1. And again, it'll open that morning and close that evening. Now it's worth 100 points. So it's worth a lot of points compared to some of the other things we've done so far. So make sure that you're preparing and you're studying. You have 75 minutes and it's 82 questions. Okay, it is more than enough time, right? If you're worried about that, the average amount of time people take is right around an hour. So most people have plenty of time. Some people finish much faster. Some take the whole time. Some of you have like access accommodations, which give you a little more time as well. If you haven't gotten me an access memo, as a side note, if you have a memo and I don't have it yet, try and get it to me this week so I can make sure you have the timing that you need for the test. Was that a question or?
what the font is gonna be, if it's multiple choice,
Mhm.
figure out stuff.
Yep, I'll talk about it, I promise,
Okay.
right? Yeah, so the exam will open up, if you click on exam 1 here, right? So it's obviously not open yet, but when it does open, you'll have 75 minutes to take it. You have 1 attempt, so make sure that you're ready and organized before you begin, that you have 75 minutes, you have a quiet place, you have internet, you've studied, so make sure you have all those things in place before you begin it. What I've done is I've made a study guide for you on what will be on the test. And so if you go back to modules, right in this top part where it says course documents and videos, right here is study guide number 1. Okay, and so what I do is I make the exam and then I go through and I make the study guide from the exam. Okay, so if it's on here, it will be on the test. If it's not on here, you don't need to worry about it. Okay, you can let it go. You don't have to study it. So exam 1 is on chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5, which will start today and finish on Wednesday. So know everything that is on here, right? And if you are, if you're like nervous about the exam, maybe over prepare. I think it's always better to over prepare for the first exam than it is to not be ready. You don't want to have that moment like partway through the exam where you're like, I wish I had done more. And so what I would do if it were me, and I've always been that like obnoxious, like have to get 100% A student that's mad if I miss one question, but that's me if you were wondering. I would go through and write or type out every term that's on here, right? And it's completely up to you. But if you were to go through and type these all out or write them all out and have it in front of you during the exam, let's say you get to OCD and you don't remember something. Rather than having to flip through the textbook, flip through the PowerPoints, try and find it in the lecture, you have it right there in front of you with the study guide. There's really no reason you shouldn't do phenomenally if you do something like that. Definitely study and prepare, even though it's open note and open book. If you're trying to look up every question, if you're trying to understand the question and look it up and find the answer, you're going to run out of time. Okay, and that is a little bit intentional. I want you to study and prepare. But if you know everything on here and you've studied it, no reason you shouldn't do phenomenally, right? Again, you should do quite well on the exam. I write all of the exam questions myself. They're very directly connected to what we've covered. I will never trick you. Okay, there will never be a trick question. So if it seems confusing, read it again. Trick questions are dumb. They just cause anxiety, right? I will never do that to you. And I would love if all of you got A's. That would make me very, very happy. The exam is mainly multiple choice and true false. There's some true false questions on there, which should be really quick. There's also a couple of short answer questions. Now, the short answer questions will never be essays. I will never have you write an essay for me on an exam. It might be something like, what are the 5 Ds of abnormality? Like I told you when we covered that, that would be a great short answer question. You would just list them for me. And I think as we go through the semester and you're looking at this, you'll start to pick them out pretty easily. They're often the ones at the end as well, just as a side note. Because what I literally do, as I said, is I make this from the exam. So as long as you know everything on here, you should be in really good shape. Okay. I know exams cause a lot of anxiety. And so hopefully this makes you feel a little bit better, and having your notes makes you feel a little better. But definitely prepare and study, and the exam will be on Monday. Are there any other questions about the exam, about the format of it, where to find it, anything in general? I hope you're feeling okay about it. I know exams are the worst, right? But you get your notes, you get your book, it's online, you can take it at home with your copy or wherever you want to be, right? And hopefully all of that helps a little bit. Thank you. Anything else? I'll remind you again and check in on Wednesday, but anything else for now? Okay, so we will leave this then. Speaking of stress, right? Hopefully this isn't you right now. Hopefully you're not feeling like this poor guy, like looks just completely stressed out. We're going to talk about disorders of stress and trauma for today and Wednesday. We'll talk a little bit about stress in general and how our body responds. And then we'll look at disorders of like extreme stress, like PTSD and ASD and C-PTSD. And then next time we'll look at the dissociative disorders, like dissociative identity disorder and a couple of others. So a lot of relevant stuff. And stress is something that college students are notoriously stressed, right? Like, I think we all have a lot of stress in our lives, something that we can probably all relate to, the idea of feeling stressed out. Stress is an interesting thing in the sense that it's very, very subjective. What stresses me out might not stress you out. What stresses you out today might not stress you out tomorrow. A lot of stress has to do with how we view and appraise events rather than the events themselves. Like, two people can experience an exam or traffic or whatever very, very differently. Traffic doesn't stress me out because I'm always so early to everything, but it stresses my partner out. She'll start screaming at like cars, and I hear my kids sometimes being like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, that's your mom talking right there." Or more graphic than that sometimes, right? But stress is a state of tension or strain, right? And anything that stresses us out is called a stressor, right? And that can literally be anything from an exam to traffic to technology to timing to money. I mean, the list goes on. And the way that we perceive and respond to these stressors dictates how we experience stress. And a little bit of stress is good, right? We got to have a little bit of stress. It's motivating at times, right? Like an exam can be good stress in some ways. Like, if you didn't have to worry about your grade, you might not care about memorizing or learning or studying the information. So some degree of stress is good, but it can go too far and causes problems. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So I have this little part of a video that I play in my intro psych class that talks about what is stress and how it affects the body, just as an introduction. And then we'll come back to this here. I mentioned a little bit of stress can be good, but too much of it can cause some problems for us. And we'll definitely talk about that a little bit as well. But our body reacts a lot to stress. Like, we tend to have this mentality of like, oh, it's just stress, like no big deal. But a lot of stress chronically can cause us issues because there's a lot of things happening in our system. And that's what we'll look at a little bit next here. Yes, okay. I want to make sure I restarted it. So whenever we experience any kind of stressor, anything, whether it's a big stressor, a little one, an exam, a fight or flight kind of moment, whatever it might be, stress activates a tiny region in our brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, which you can see in the top image, is a small part of the brain, context here, back to feeling neutral or back in balance. So it activates the hypothalamus, which is then going to activate two other systems in our body. So it kind of kickstarts this stress response in our system whenever we experience a stressor. So it activates two different systems. One is the autonomic nervous system, and the other is the endocrine system. And I'm just putting this up here in a different way. So the autonomic nervous system is one of our nervous systems, right? And the endocrine system, a different system working closely with it, that's in charge of glands and hormones and so on. The nervous system, more neurotransmitters and kind of a faster system of communication. So both of these systems get activated whenever we feel stress, and they're going to work together, work in harmony to react, right? And so let's talk about each one of them a little bit more. The autonomic nervous system, if you're wondering where that is, you're like, where is that system, right? Our nervous system is divided into two main systems, right? So the nervous system divides into peripheral and central nervous systems together. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. I was going to say just the brain and spinal cord, but those are massive things, right? Brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is made up of all the other nerve connections throughout our body, everything branching out from those two things to connect to other regions of our system. Within the peripheral, it divides again into the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic kind of sounds like automatic. It controls a lot of our very automatic functions, if that helps you remember. And then also the somatic, which controls a lot of our things with our skin and muscles, but we're not worried about that for the moment. And the autonomic nervous system divides again into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And both of those we could add here, sympathetic and parasympathetic. these two divisions play a really big role in how we react to stress. So the autonomic nervous system is triggered, and then the sympathetic one is what plays a role in what's called fight or flight, right? So if we're going to decide we want to fight off a stressor or run from it, sometimes we say freeze is another possibility. And then the parasympathetic nervous system calms us down once that stressor is gone. It's in charge of rest and digest, which sounds so much nicer than fight or flight, right? I would like to rest and digest instead of the other. But these two things make up the autonomic nervous system, which is activated on this one side. So again, sympathetic, sorry, I forgot to switch the slide, arouses us and is in charge of fight or flight. And parasympathetic calms us down and is in charge of rest and digest. Yeah.
Sorry, can you go back to the definitions of the system real quick?
Yeah. Well, you have the slides, so you can always go back and grab them, right? No, it's okay. No worries. Yeah.
Freeze and what's the other app?
Fight, flight, freeze. Yeah, sometimes they add what's the other one? They just added it like a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, it's gonna drive me nuts. You should look it up and then let me know what you find. What was that? Fawn. Thank you. Thank you. Uh-huh.
Is there, to me, they seem just as legit. as
Yeah.
Fight or flight.
Right. They just haven't been around as long. So we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the like other things that are happening here, like as we keep going. But like there's a lot of new research on the way that stress affects our system. And fight or flight was like the old standby, right? Like it's always been around. But then we have these new ones where like we freeze and everything almost like shuts down. And then fawn is almost like swooning, where we like have a hard time handling it in a different way. Like there's a lot of things happening, and those things are newer, right? As we understand like the system and how we react a little bit more, and the long-term effects of stress a little bit more. Now, what we know more now is that when you have stress when you're young, like almost like in childhood, that it can affect the way that you respond to stress the rest of your life. And you can change it, but it takes a lot of effort to change it. So yeah, they're starting to be added more, right? I should encourage that by adding it up here as well. But they are newer. We haven't known about them first. Yeah.
So my ex and one of my sons on.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting. It kind of comes out in the end
Mhm.
in all the same ways, but just looks different.
How do you mean? Like, do you, I mean, if you don't mind saying more.
Well, it affected their mental health.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
like my husband, had a very intrusive dad, and all the kids kind of take different roles.
Yeah.
He would stick by his dad's side, spend every Saturday on him with him working. The others watch TV, and then he found that, I mean, as a kid, he just figured out if he likes me, well, maybe as much.
Yeah. It's challenging. And like you said, people can learn to take on different roles as a way to try to diffuse the situation or the stress that they're experiencing. Yeah. Yeah. And again, like, we're learning more and more as our technology and our advancements in like brain science get better and better. But these are the old ones for sure. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? But different like arousal level responses. And then the parasympathetic calms us down after a stressor has passed. If it passes, right? For some people, stress is ongoing, right? And so these systems stay activated. But what happens is when the nervous system pathway here, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to hit that yet. When the nervous system pathway is activated, it releases a lot of neurotransmitters. The nervous system communicates through neurotransmitters, right? In a very fast, like chemical reaction kind of way. And so we get things like norepinephrine. As one of the bigger stress neurotransmitters that's released. So when we have a stressor, both sides, we'll get to the other side in a minute, the autonomic nervous system side activates, giving us that kind of arousal level, flight, and so on reaction. Neurotransmitters are released, like norepinephrine, causing a stress response that we feel. Now, all of that is happening relatively quickly. At the same time as that fast reaction, we have the other side reacting as well. The endocrine system is made up of a bunch of different glands and things like the HPA pathway, which is what we see up here. So the endocrine system is made up of like the hypothalamus, the different adrenal glands, the like reproductive glands, and so on. And this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal pathway, or the HPA pathway. And it's one route that we deal with when we respond to stress. It triggers all of these different glands in our system to release hormones. Hormones travel through the bloodstream. They're much slower and longer lasting. And some of the major stress hormones that we have are things like cortisol and ACTH. Right, those are two of our really big stress hormones that we have. I won't ask you what it stands for, but it's adrenocorticotropic hormone, right, is what ACTH stands for. But these two things are coursing through our system whenever we're feeling stressed. So whether it's an exam or something longer or something very immediate, all of this is happening in our system at any given moment that we're stressed out. And you can feel it, right? It causes tension. It causes anxiety. It causes like your palms to sweat, your heart to work harder and faster. There's a lot of physical things that happen when you are feeling stressed out, right? And those things can, again, happen on like a chronic long-term level, or it can be due to something like a trauma, which is where we'll go next. Any other like questions, thoughts, comments, anything else for the moment before we keep going? So I added this slide on my end, and you don't necessarily need it, so which is why it wasn't in your slides if you were curious. But I want to talk for a minute about what trauma is before we start talking about the different trauma-related disorders. So when we get to PTSD and ASD and C-PTSD, some of these disorders in a moment, they're all dealing with traumatic events. Okay. And sadly, a lot of us experience trauma at some point in our life. It doesn't mean you're going to get a disorder necessarily, but it's possible. So emotional trauma is the result of an extraordinarily stressful event or some kind of experience that leaves you feeling unsafe or helpless or in danger in some way, right? Some traumas, as it says up here, can cause physical harm, like a car accident, for example. But you don't have to have a physical injury to experience emotional trauma. A lot of people experience emotional trauma from a wide variety of events that can happen throughout their life. And it can be one singular event. It can be ongoing events, which is why we have different types of trauma disorders. But there's a really interesting book that was written, it's about 10 years ago at this point, actually. It's been around for a bit. And I have a copy of it. I've read it. I'm really like interested in like this topic. It's a topic that I've studied quite a bit. I'll pass it around if you want to take a look at it. But this is probably the leading book in the field as it relates to like stress and trauma-related disorders. So when we experience a trauma, according to the author of this book, Bessel van der Kolk, he talks a lot about the effects of that trauma on us in terms of a long-term issue, especially if we experience trauma when we're little, right? If we have emotional trauma as a child, it actually is thought to rewire the brain, right? And have this long-term effect on the way that we react to stuff as we get older. So he talks a lot in this book about how traumatic stress is associated with like functional and chemical changes that occur in our brain and in the limbic system, which is in charge of emotions. He also talks about a lot about how it has this impact on us very globally throughout our life. And all the different like therapies and methods that we can use to try and treat it, that we can rewire the brain and recover from it through things like resiliency and so on. So he has a very like this approach of like we can change stuff. But I found a video of him talking about trauma and the effects of trauma, and it kind of summarizes a couple of key points from his book. So I want to play it for you. Again, this is probably one of the most like contemporary discussions of trauma. And if any of you know someone who's experienced trauma in your life, you probably would find this book interesting to read, as it really goes into the effects of how it changes us. Yeah,
I'm reading this book.
right now.
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
I took a break from it, but
It's a little hard to read at
Yeah.
times. It's very high level.
yeah, there's a lot. There's also just a lot of.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because like he talks about he'll talk about like an experience, an experience like a process that
Yeah.
the brain goes through, and then he'll give you like an example of a patient that he's worked with.
Right.
Like the one that came to mind where the two people who got in that car accident in Canada or something were really bad. It was really foggy morning, and like there was like almost 100 cars in the accident or something, and there was a lot of deaths and trauma. And he talks about how they both handled it very differently. And I think it was fight or flight, as they're just talking about where after doing some like brain scans, I think the woman froze up. She was experiencing freeze while he was experiencing flight.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it was. But it was, I just like, I know the professor said that they recommend it, but I also highly recommend this book, especially if you're a psychology person.
Yeah, and that's thank you for saying that. Like it is really like a very like popular contemporary book on this topic and looking at how we deal with stress in a different way, right? In a very like long-term reorganization kind of way. And again, I have a video of him talking about this that I think is worth playing for you. So I will. It's what, like 7 minutes. He's just talking about how we deal with trauma and the effects that it has and what is trauma, which is going to segue us into where we go from here. Play this of what is trauma and how it affects us, right? Because that's where we're going next. Right? We're going to look at these disorders of trauma, but I think it's important to understand that trauma is much more than just like you were in war and in combat. Like it can be very different things from person to person, and it can be systemic stuff as well. And so what he's getting at is when we experience this, it does have a rewiring effect on our system, and it can affect us for the rest of our life if we don't find ways to turn it around. Right. And a lot of people do find ways to turn it around through therapy and so on. But I think, again, a great book, really interesting guy, and a specialist in this area. Anything else here with him? Yeah, before we move.
To soldiers of World War II and their children, like the way it affected their brain was like so extreme that even their children were able to experience like their trauma.
Yeah, that's disturbing, right? And we sometimes call that epigenetics, right? Where we look at, how are the effects of life experiences almost altering our genetic expression of things. And it can be generational, right? Generational trauma and cultural trauma is something that is also gaining a lot more attention. Any other thoughts or questions? Anything else for the moment? Again, I'm not the lightest of reading, but I would definitely recommend where you laugh, right? Because it's there's a lot of science in this book, but it is really interesting at the same time. Yeah.
I have a friend that believes he was in Afghanistan and he was the guy in the dark with the scope, and
Yeah.
it's amazing how much migraines and PTSD.
Right.
And one day as my son was starting ECT, I asked him, is the military offer anything with that? And he's like, no. We're just waiting for everybody to die off, and they work so hard and they don't have the sacrifices.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's challenge.
Well, and like you're saying, that like the migraines and the stomach aches and the pain, like there's a lot of like physical effects that come from extreme stress like that, right? And we're starting to see that connection more and more. Yeah.
He does he always has an emergency bag in his truck, so he's often a first responder. He's got everything he could want.
Yeah.
He took up diving in the dark in a muddy river for like body retrieval. Like he does this big stuff for fun.
Yeah.
Just gotta keep doing stuff.
Yeah, keeping busy, right? And it sounds like he's finding ways to cope, right? That's important, finding ways to keep busy and move forward. Oh, there are a couple of disorders of related to stress and trauma. right? Two main ones, and then we're going to talk about another one that isn't in the DSM, but it probably will be as we move forward. It will, I would imagine, be added in the next version. But the two that we recognize right now are called ASD and PTSD, acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. And these actually have almost the exact same criteria. The only difference is timing, right? One is very short-lived and one can be lifelong, potentially, depending on what you do with it. So acute stress disorder is when somebody has a stress-related, or trauma-related reaction to something that happens within a month, within 4 weeks of a traumatic event. Now, it might not be the most sensitive way of remembering it, but it's just a cute little stress disorder. If that helps you remember it, it's shorter lasting, it's smaller, right? This one only lasts, it lasts less than a month, and it's within 4 weeks of a stressor. So if somebody has something traumatic happen to them and they have an instant reaction to it, and we'll look at some of those reactions in a moment, and it doesn't last very long, we call that acute stress disorder. So it's a very short lasting trauma response. I would argue this is a very normal reaction to something traumatic. Most of us, when we experience a car accident or anything that could be traumatic to us, we're going to respond to it. And so with ASD, this is a very short-lived reaction. PTSD is a lot of the same symptoms, which again, I believe are on the next slide here. But this one can happen at any time. It could be months or even years after a traumatic event, and it could last for months or even years into the future. So the only difference between these two is the amount of time it takes for them to start and how long they last. Otherwise, everything else is the same. So with acute stress disorder, very brief. PTSD tends to be much longer, and it can persist for a very long time. Now let's look at some of the different symptoms and things that are happening with both of these. The symptoms with both, again, they're the same. The triggers, the same, right? The only difference is the timing. So the symptoms with both of these is that it's almost like whatever happened to you haunts you in a way. That's how I like to think about it. It's almost like it's haunting you. It does not go away. So you experience something traumatic, and like Vanderkolk was talking about, that's not where it stops, right? You keep re-experiencing the traumatic event. People with PTSD and ASD will have flashbacks of the event. They'll think about it when they don't want to, right? It interferes with their life. They have dreams or nightmares about it. It keeps popping up in your mind. You tend to avoid anything that reminds you of the event, right? Anything that might trigger it. Let's say it happened at night, so you don't go out at night, or you got in an awful car accident, so you don't drive anymore, right? And you tend to avoid anything that would remind you of that trauma. People oftentimes have very reduced responsiveness. They become numb. They almost shut down and withdraw, or they can become what's called hypervigilant, where they're always on edge and very easy to arouse. The stereotype with PTSD is that it's someone who was in combat, which can definitely be the case. Originally, this was actually called shell shock syndrome, and then it was changed later to PTSD to be broader for any kind of trauma. But the stereotype is like a war veteran that have a car backfire or a firework goes off and they're instantly in fight or flight mode, right? And that can be the case, but it could be anything. I had a coworker who was a friend of mine. We worked at Starbucks together, years and years and years ago. This is 20 years ago now. We worked at Starbucks together. Her name was Nancy. And one day I was trying to get her attention because I needed more grande lids. It was something so stupid and so small, but she had a headset on and she couldn't hear me. And so I came up behind her and I said her name 6 or 7 times. She didn't respond. I touched her on the shoulder to get her attention. And I did not know that that was a trigger for her. And now I never touch people on the shoulder after this. I touched her on the shoulder. She whipped around, threw me on the floor, and was ready to break my tiny little baby wrists that I have, and was just this wild look in her eye. I didn't know, and I found out later, that she had been brutally attacked from behind. She had used to be, she was a police officer for years. Somebody snuck up on her from the back, crushed her shoulder by grabbing it. And so she was very sensitive to being touched on the shoulder. Unlucky me, I did not know this. And she, like I said, nearly threw me on the ground, on the floor crying, I just needed grande lids, right? And she apologized later. We actually became good friends. She was our maid of honor in our wedding, years later. But she had PTSD. That was her trigger, was being touched on the shoulder or someone sneaking up on her. She actually almost killed me on the night before my wedding too. Just a random side note for you. I stayed at her house like the night before our wedding, and I came in late because I was out doing pre-wedding things. We'll leave it at that. And I came in late and she pulled a gun on me. I was like, in tears. She made me cry a lot of times in my life, I think, right? I don't know if she was but like very hyper vigilant, always on edge and anticipating something like that happening. You can sometimes get that. It can manifest as anger or guilt, bless you, or anxiety can manifest in a lot of different ways. But people who experience these disorders, they're very jumpy and on edge, or sometimes withdrawing, and very numb, or you can see both happen. It can be triggered by anything that's traumatic to you. These are common ones, like combat is where this came from, but it literally can be anything. It can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be environmental, anything that is experienced as traumatic. And I imagine a lot of you probably know someone with PTSD, right? It's a relatively common disorder. The hard thing is a lot of us experience trauma, and it can kind of haunt us a little bit afterward. I don't know, any stories or comments or thoughts, people in your life with PTSD? Any thoughts at all? Yeah.
So like to school. One time, and we had like squad like story the whole school was insane.
That's scary.
My twin sister was in like a study hall room and it had 3 different points of tree. So they came in 3 different times, not realizing that it was the same classroom. And one of the times that they came in, she was right next to the door, and one of the guys pointed his gun right in her face. She got really freaked out.
Sure.
Like fast forward like 4 or 5 years later, she's in Denmark. And a police officer just walks into the door at McDonald's, and she's with her friends and she starts freaking out.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very PTSD-like response. And sometimes it can catch you off guard like that. Like you might not even understand the connection 100%. Like how scary too, right? And on a lot of levels. Other stories or thoughts? Anybody else? People in your life? PTSD? Other reactions? Picture me being thrown on the floor by Nancy. But I mean, this is relatively common, like especially in the stereotype is still like war veterans, right? And like both of my grandparents were in combat, right? And couldn't watch fireworks shows. Like anytime fireworks were on, it would trigger that response for them. It's kind of like the stereotypical reaction. But it can literally be from anything. I have a clip of this as like an example. It kind of shows both sides of the withdrawal side and then also the hypervigilant piece. If you've seen the movie American Sniper, that's what it's from. So there is a little bit, there's a scene where it looks like he's going to hurt the dog. The dog is fine. He doesn't do anything to the dog, just to let you know, in case you were worried. I also have this example. Katniss from Hunger Games is another like wonderful example of someone struggling with PTSD. She's very on edge and hypervigilant, and it affects her. But let me show you the American Sniper clip as an example. Right, like he is like very withdrawn, right? He's sitting there staring at the TV. There's nothing on the TV. The sounds of combat, that's what's going on in his head. And then you see that hypervigilance piece, right? Like the second it looks like something's going to happen with that dog, he's like right there with that kind of wild, reactive look. That's something that you often see with PTSD. People will have that like on edge, very jumpy, and then sometimes that very numb, withdrawn, like very caught up in their head. But the essence of both of these disorders is that it just keeps like haunting you, and it won't go away until you do something to treat it. There are a lot of treatments for it, which we'll obviously talk about as well. One other like very closely related disorder, and this is the one that they added into the slides. This isn't recognized by the DSM yet. Okay, but it is something that's gaining an incredible amount of discussion within the psychological community, to the point where I feel like it will be in the next DSM. So right now there's a disorder called developmental trauma disorder, which is recognized in Europe. And this is kind of our equivalent of it, that will likely be in the next DSM. So maybe sneak peek preview of it, right? But complex PTSD. So PTSD traditionally, or ASD, is one traumatic event. It's typically one clear trauma that happens, right? Or like a cluster of things that happen. Complex PTSD is a little bit different and it manifests a little bit differently. But this is a disorder where people have like ongoing trauma. And it's typically things that happen during childhood. So we often talk about this as like childhood trauma related or attachment trauma, neglect or abuse when you're younger. But what it does is it causes an ongoing like PTSD response. And like in that book, he talks a lot about this as well. This is probably what he's talking about more than a specific event. But what you get with this disorder is a slightly different presentation, right? But some similar threads, hence the names being so similar. Somebody who struggles with C-PTSD and has childhood neglect or trauma oftentimes really struggles to regulate their emotions. So they tend to have emotional extremes and a hard time finding a balance in the middle. It's a very common presentation of this. Changes in consciousness means that they often dissociate. We're going to talk about dissociation a lot on Wednesday, but it's oftentimes it's like you check out or you're not mentally present in the moment. You kind of dissociate away from stressors. There's a lot of like negative self-perception, feeling like you're worthless, you're unlovable, right? There's a very low self-esteem that tends to come with this because in the years when you're forming your ideas about self-worth, you experience neglect or trauma. So oftentimes people with this disorder feel very unsafe in the world around them, right? And that it's occurring on like an emotional and a physical level, according to like Vanderpool. We see difficulty with relationships. There's a lot of lack of trust. Oftentimes people who have this disorder can have a hard time forming long-term loving relationships. Interesting, there's a very strong correlation between this and borderline personality disorder, which we'll talk about more in chapter 13. But a lot of people who have borderline personality disorder are finding themselves actually having this instead, because it's explained by trauma as a child. And the two disorders have a very similar presentation. They also tend to have things like emotional flashbacks. They're a little different than like seeing an event. This is more of like an emotional experience, as though you've been thrown back into the adverse circumstances that you experienced when you were younger. So maybe somebody leaving causes you great emotional pain because somebody left you when you were younger, right? Or something triggers that emotional response of something that happens when you were a kid. There also tend to be a lot of destructive and risky behaviors with this, like self-harming behaviors, addictive behaviors are common as a way of coping. So this is, again, not recognized now, but I guarantee it's going to be at some point, right? It is something that has a lot of research and a lot of like discussion right now within the realm of trauma and stress. So just a kind of slightly different presentation. PTSD, ASD is one event. This is like an ongoing, typically childhood related trauma. Yeah. The hard thing with PTSD and C-PTSD is they can be a lifelong struggle. But typically when people get treatment or therapy, they can rewire and relearn to be okay. So if you get treatment for these things, it can be something you can definitely reverse. Or if you don't, it could be something that maybe you feel to some degree for the rest of your life. Kind of a big spectrum. Some people, it just kind of, they outgrow it. It's like they process it and they're okay. And others, it lasts forever. So why is it that some people develop stress disorders and not others, right? Again, a lot of us experience trauma, and it's normal to have a traumatic reaction if you experience something traumatic, right? Like if you get in a bad car accident, you might not want to drive. You might not want to get in the car for a period of time. Or let's say it happened at a certain intersection. The rest of your life, you might avoid that intersection, or at least be anxious when you go through it. But traumas are enough in themselves to cause a disorder, but not everybody who experiences one gets one, a disorder, I mean. So there are biological and genetic factors that might play a role, right? Traumatic events, again, change the brain, they change the body. And so that can cause vulnerabilities for you later on. It could be that some people have stronger reactions to stress than others. They're more sensitive to stress and anxiety, which can cause a propensity towards a disorder. Personality is huge, right? Every single one of us has a different threshold for what we can handle. There are times where I'm like, I think I can handle what like 6 other people would handle. Like, and then there are times where I feel the opposite way. Like my mother-in-law, like the tiniest stressor and she is done. Like life is over and like she's on the floor crying about it. And like my partner and I are like, I've got like 75 of those things that one thing just crippled you on. Like everybody's different. Like one exam could be enough to send somebody over the edge versus somebody else might have 6 exams next week and they're fine. It's just our personality differences play a big role in what we can handle and not handle, right? And that's something that starts very early in life. Childhood experiences, if you experienced trauma when you're younger or you lived in poverty or abuse or low socioeconomic status, right, that might make you more vulnerable to trauma later in life. People who have good social support tend to do better. If you have friends and family that are there for you when you experience something traumatic, you tend to do better than if you don't. Like he was saying in the video, like if your parent picks you up and they're there and they take care of you, you're going to be better off than if you experience that in isolation. There are a lot of cultural factors, high correlations between people who grew up in poverty and socioeconomic status that is low, experiencing more trauma, and the severity. The more severe the trauma, the more likely you are to have an ongoing issue with it. And so there's a lot of factors why one person might develop this and somebody else might not. There are also a lot of treatments. Right. And the treatments for stress related and trauma disorders are just growing exponentially. I'm kind of an EMDR, like it's like a pet like project research thing of mine. I know a lot about EMDR. This is a very like common treatment for things like PTSD, ASD, C-PTSD, all the acronyms. We can use EMDR for C-PTSD, right? Like it's too many acronyms in one sentence. But a lot of people who have these disorders go to therapy. And when I was a therapist, or therapist trainee, I should be accurate. I was never technically a full therapist. I worked with several clients who had PTSD, right? And it was a lot of like facing down the event and talking through it and exposures. But we have some ways now that we're using more and more. EMDR is a very popular method for treating PTSD. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's something that was interestingly discovered on accident by a woman named Francine Shapiro. Right? She was walking through the forest one day, thinking about this trauma in her life, and she noticed that she felt better. And then she set out to find out what about that situation made her feel better. And it was something that she thought had to do with the eye movement of the trees passing by her, coupled with thinking about the traumatic event, and set out to test that and test it and refine it. And it's finally something that has a lot of backing to it. Years ago, it was considered pseudoscientific, and now it has a lot of evidence to support it. And so what we do with this is we cause you to have what's called bilateral brain stimulation while thinking about a traumatic event. I've gotten to be on both sides of this, which is really interesting. I got to experience EMDR and I got to learn EMDR on both sides. But what you do is you traditionally stare at a light that bounces back and forth. And you can find this on YouTube, though I would not encourage you to do this on your own at home without somebody helping you. But they are out there for sure. The traditional presentation is a light, or you can hold tappers in your hands and they buzz in an alternating fashion, which is the way that I did it when I did this. But you think about a traumatic event and you have this brain stimulation occurring, and it's thought to help you work through it in a different way. It's a very brain-based method. It's activating this bilateral stimulation of the brain in a way that causes you to process it and digest it in a certain way. The thought is that the traumatic memory is stuck and unprocessed in your brain. And so by activating it, we unstick it and allow it to be digested and worked through. I have a little video that explains this. Let me play it for you. I think it's helpful in understanding what's going on and what this can look like. And again, this can go in a couple of, but the really cool thing about this process is you start out, like they said, with a negative belief about yourself. So you had a traumatic event happen to you, and maybe it's I don't have control, or I'm worthless, or I'm whatever. And then you slowly start to change that belief to a positive one through the course of EMDR. They say 3 months. It is all over the board. Those kind of drives me nuts that they say 3 months. So like I had a round of treatment for EMDR for a trauma that I went through, and it took over a year. once a week for a year. And other people, it could be like 2 or 3 sessions, or even one really good session. So it is kind of all over the place. But this can be a very helpful treatment for changing the way that you view an event. And again, the idea is that it's stuck in your brain, almost like undigested, unprocessed. And by going through it painfully through each detail, with that brain stimulation, it releases it in a way that would take much, much longer, or maybe even be impossible without that bilateral stimulation being present. So really interesting type of therapy. Vanderkolk talks about that in his book as well. It's gained a lot of popularity, though it can be very, very difficult to do. A lot of people don't talk about how it makes it much worse before it makes it better, right? That's a very common thing that you see with this. You're dredging up all of the stuff that you experienced to work through it to make it better. And that's the case with a lot of therapies. They can make it worse before you do see that improvement. But this is a very common treatment for ASD, PTSD, and C-PTSD as well. Any questions, thoughts, comments, stories, anything about EMDR? Anything here? Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I love it.
You love it?
Yeah, it feels easy. Comfortable with having.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, let's do this.
Mm.
I'm right into it. And then, but for my ex, like he spent his lifetime not wanting to have a relationship.
Yeah.
And so it's terrifying for him.
Yeah.
Like, it's worked for him once and he's about to go in and do it again. And I've done it randomly, but it's the coolest. Like
I love you're like, my trauma is fun to deal with, right? It can be interesting. Yeah.
I'm gonna stick my mom in the boat and push her out to sea. Or I was like playing in the field of flowers, and then next time I go back into it, you know, they stop you and ask you, okay, what are you thinking? And then I say, go with that. And then the next time I'm like, whoops, falling off a cliff. Like all kinds of things are happening.
Yeah.
But I always he always says, what number are you starting out as 10 being the worst? And I'm like, 11.
Yeah.
And then by the time I'm done, and 1.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to rate your SUDS, your subjective unit of distress, when you start and then when you finish, right? And I love that you said that if you're comfortable dealing with emotions, this can be a very cathartic experience. The problem is a lot of people aren't comfortable dealing with their emotions. And so it can be very, very uncomfortable for someone to sit there and cry in front of someone that they don't know that well, like a therapist, you know. But your brain does go all over the place. And it's the most difficult thing to explain to someone who's never done it. But it is, you start with an image and then you just let your brain go wherever it's going to go. And you just follow it through until its conclusion, which can be 1 session or a year's worth of sessions or more. And then it can be really, really helpful for a lot of people or really challenging.
Because you're stimulating both sides of your brain.
Right.
So I'm really heavy on the right side of my brain,
Mhm.
and then I'm bringing logic.
Yeah.
And it really helps me.
Yeah.
I think going the other direction. Much.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's a very interesting procedure. And again, it's difficult to explain if you've never done it. Any other? Yeah, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
A similar thing. Hand buzzing.
Yeah.
Please. I don't know why my therapist did it, so I'm still confused by that.
Sure.
But yeah, because it was just kind of random, but yeah, it was like just they would buzz at different
Sure.
things and
You can hold one in each hand
Yeah.
and alternate buzzing. Yeah. And sometimes like some people, they need to close their eyes to picture something. And so if you need to close your eyes, then following something with your fingers is not easy to do. And so a lot of people will use like little tappers if you hold in your hand and they buzz in an alternating fashion. And another use for this, which may or may not have been relevant, is sometimes there's a procedure called tapping something in, right? And so if any of you have ever heard of like giving yourself a butterfly hug and like doing like alternating tapping, if you ever have a really calm and peaceful moment, sometimes therapists will tap in that peaceful calmness with buzzers.
I think that
Right, yeah, you're welcome, right? No, I'm just kidding. Or what they might do is have you give yourself a butterfly hug. And so let's say you're sitting out in nature and you feel at peace and you feel really happy. Close your eyes for a minute and like alternating in a very slow way, tap that moment in. This is something that's gaining a lot of popularity too. It's called tapping. And it's an offshoot of EMDR. And so oftentimes if you experience a moment of safety or calmness or peace or love or whatever, something positive, you'll tap that moment in to strengthen it in your brain. And so that may or may not have been covered as well. Yeah. So it's kind of an offshoot of this, using that bilateral stimulation to increase positive things in addition to work through. All right. So I'll stop there. And then next time we'll get into the dissociative disorders. Don't forget to start preparing for the exam next week. And I will see you all on Wednesday. All right.